College Football Playoff Committee has put out their fourth set of rankings for the college football playoffs. Now, these are not the final rankings, so it really kind of doesn't matter. At this point, you might as well just go with whatever the AP Top 25 says. But I guess it gives us a look into what they're thinking. And on the whole, I think we can pretty well agree with the rankings that they gave us and what they put out. So they had Georgia at number 1, Ohio State at number 2, Michigan at number 3, TCU at number 4. The only thing is, I would put maybe Michigan and TCU and swap them because you know that Ohio State and Michigan already have to play each other. So one of those teams is going to get bounced, and I think the committee and myself and a lot of you guys will agree that it's probably going to be Ohio State that comes out victorious in that game. On the outside looking in, they had Tennessee, LSU, USC, and Alabama. So we can see that the SEC bias is heavily favored here for the playoffs once again. And I just want to run through a couple scenarios of what the playoffs could potentially look like and how I think the committee is personally in a bad spot this year. But before we do that, please go ahead, hit that like and the subscribe button. Let me know what you guys are thinking down in the comments below. What do you guys think the Final Four are going to be for the playoffs this year at the end of the season? Okay, so the committee's kind of in a bad spot right now because we know that the playoffs is going to be expanding to 12 teams, which I agree it should. This year is a really good model of why the playoffs should be expanding. But they have a couple scenarios that are not working in their favor as they show their SEC bias. So let's kind of walk through this a little bit. I'm going to give you scenario 1, and it's one that I've pushed out on social media and in some other videos with other people, so bear with me here. Scenario number 1, Ohio State and TCU go undefeated at 13-0, right? They've obviously won their respective conferences. That's going to be your number 1 and your number 2, Ohio State, TCU. What do we do with number 3 and number 4? Well, you have North Carolina as the ACC champion at 12-1. You have USC as the Pac-12 champion at 12-1. You have LSU as the 11-2 SEC champion, right? So those are the other 3 champions that we have for the college football playoffs. Now, you could swap North Carolina out with Clemson. It doesn't matter. You just have a 12-1 ACC champ. I personally think it's going to be North Carolina. But for the respective conversation here, we're just going to put 12-1 ACC champ. If you're the committee, what do you do here? Because you're going to have a 12-1 Georgia, who their best win is against Tennessee. And then you have, their best win is against Tennessee, and then they have another crucial win against Oregon. If you're Tennessee, you've had wins at Pittsburgh, Florida at home, at LSU, Alabama at home, Kentucky at home, at Georgia. Right? The rankings go as follows: 17, 20, 25, 3, 19, and 3. You're ending the season with South Carolina and at Vanderbilt, 2 on the road games. And then you're not going to get the chance to play for an SEC championship. What's the committee do here in terms of being able to select for those final 3 spots or those final 2 spots? Because you know they're going to want to put Georgia in even if they lose the SEC championship game. Which I could make an argument with you that Georgia doesn't deserve it at that point. Even though they might be one of the better teams, they don't deserve it. Because they didn't win their conference, which is a requirement by the playoff committee. And they hardly played anybody. They only beat the number 1 team in the country in Tennessee. And then they beat a number 11 Oregon team, who, they're 8-2 now and have a chance to potentially still, I think, play in their conference championship. But other than that, I mean, your schedule was pretty weak this year. In my opinion, the committee on scenario 1 should probably go your 1-loss ACC champ and USC. Those should be your 4 teams. And if so, I really like this because you're now introducing 3 new teams to the college football playoffs. TCU, North Carolina, USC, and then you've got Ohio State, who has been in the college football playoffs before, and they've won a national championship. I really like this one. But you and I both know that this one's probably not going to happen because they want to find this way to get either Georgia in, the SEC champion in LSU, or even in Tennessee. Which, when I watch it and I look at how they have it set up right now, you could easily have a one-loss Georgia at number 4, Ohio State, TCU 1 and 2, and then Tennessee at number 3. They very easily could do that, which I think is wrong because now you're putting in 2 SEC teams above the SEC champion, which I don't agree with. Don't agree with that at all. Scenario 2 that we have, which is something similar to what I was talking about. Ohio State, TCU, you have LSU coming in as the SEC champion, and then you've got Oregon sitting as the Pac-12 champion, and you have UCLA sitting as an 11-2 team, looking on the outside. So my theory is, if you can put in an 11-2 LSU, why can't you put in an 11-2 Oregon? Why can't you do that? The SEC bias here, I think, is what is causing the playoffs to expand to 12 teams. And when I look at the rankings and I look at what we can have at the end of the season, this is why I think we should be at 12 teams. Because at the end of the season, you can have a 12-team playoff format like this. Ohio State, number 1. TCU, number 2. Those are your 2 undefeated conference champions. North Carolina at number 3. Or the 12-1 ACC champ, whatever you want to put there. USC at number 4 as the Pac-12 champion. 12-1. Then you can put LSU at number 5 as the SEC champion. Right? 11-2. Now, this is all under the assumption that Georgia loses. But you can put LSU in 11-2 as the SEC champion. Then from there, we can give you one group of 5 bid as a conference champion. Whoever's the highest. And right now, I'm going to heavily lean in favor Tulane. I think they're really good. And I think Tulane has the best shot. So you put them in number 6. After that point, what do you do with the next 6 spots? Okay, you can put in your Georgia, your Tennessee, and your Alabama. Which we know they want to do that. They want to put all 3 of those teams in there. So you can put them in there. Then you can put in Clemson, who is a team historically that has played in the College Football Playoffs, won national championship, and somebody they would probably like to have in there as well. You can put in a Penn State, who has had to play a Michigan and a Penn State, or a Michigan and an Ohio State. You can put them in there. That gives you 4 of those spots taken. For the next 2, shoot. You could put in a Kansas State team who has played pretty well this season, especially with Will Howard at their quarterback position, and has had a pretty formidable schedule. You can put them in there. And then what do you do with that last spot? Okay, well, you can give it to another Pac-12 team like Oregon or UCLA, or maybe you can give it to a Florida State who is on the rise as a 7-3 team, or maybe a Notre Dame team, or you could give it out to another group of 5 team like UCF. There's endless possibilities. And that is why the playoffs needs to expand to 12 teams. That's why the committee's in kind of a bad spot this year. Because they're going to want to put in the SEC teams. But the SEC teams might not be the way to go. You might have a better college football playoffs by leaving the SEC out of this thing and putting in your one-loss conference champions from the other schools. I would really like to see an Ohio State, TCU, North Carolina, USC playoff. Now again, this scenario only works if Georgia loses. If Georgia wins, you're going to have Georgia, Ohio State, TCU, respectively, at 13-0. And then what do you do with the number 4 spot? You can certainly give it to a one-loss ACC champ, a one-loss Pac-12 champ. Definitely makes the conversation a lot easier for the committee because now you pretty much have to go between those 2 teams and say which one has the better strength of schedule. You look at what USC's done, and you look at what North Carolina's got. North Carolina might have the Heisman Trophy winner, but they really haven't played anybody. They lost to a Notre Dame team that, quite honestly, they shouldn't have lost to, and if they didn't, they'd be undefeated. But other than that, they haven't had any ranked wins. Outside of their final 3 games of the season, they're going to have to play NC State, number 24 right now, and then a top 10 Clemson team. And then potentially whoever's waiting for them in the ACC championship. However, USC, on the other hand, definitely is going to have a better argument in terms of making a case for the college football playoffs as a one-loss team, because they've played ranked opponents. They've had a formidable schedule. As much as people don't want to admit it, no, you fans don't want to admit it, listen, they went and lost to a top 20 Utah team at a place that's really hard to win at. They're going to have to play at UCLA this week, which is a sold-out crowd, largest student section ever for UCLA this weekend with over 16,000 people. And then you're going to have to end your season with Notre Dame. Now, mind you, they had to go play at Oregon State, and Oregon State's now a top 25 team. Oregon State is getting their respect. So you could look at USC's schedule and go, it's a little bit better. And they got Caleb Williams, who potentially could be a Heisman finalist as well. And the committee, I guess, could give Lincoln Riley the benefit of the doubt because, well, he's made college football playoffs before, and it's a feel-good story for him. It'd probably sell a little bit within the playoffs. So that's really and ideally what can happen here. I think the committee's in a bad spot, though. They've got to be rooting for Georgia to win, because if Georgia doesn't win, listen, hell could freeze over. We're going to riot if they put in a one-loss non-SEC champ and a two-loss SEC team into the playoffs. Go ahead, jump in the comments. Let me know below what you guys think about the playoffs. Who are going to be your top 4 teams at the end of the year? And if you haven't already, please go ahead, hit that like and subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really helps me bring you guys great content. Be on the lookout this week for some game previews coming up. Big week for a lot of teams. A big week for the Oklahoma Sooners and the Oklahoma State Cowboys. We will dive into a little bit more of that tomorrow. But until then, see you guys next time.